All right, so we're talking about moles and other pesky diggers. This will not be a very long presentation because at least from my experience of working in extension and the types of phone calls that I get, it really only comes down to maybe 3 big ones and then a couple of others to consider. So we're going to look through maybe 3 to 5 different reasons why you may go out sometime and find holes in your yard or tunnels in your yard. And of course, we can't start this without first talking about moles, because that is number one. And so I set this up kind of as a police rap sheet for the different animals that you might expect to see out into your yard. The mole, of course, aka the eastern mole, is the primary culprit for Kentucky. There are some other species of moles, but they don't cause the type of damage that the eastern mole does. The type of damage in their criminal history report, of course, is that they have destructive tunneling to expensive lawns and gardens. They can sometimes, I've seen this, where they've gone underneath a row of shrubs, not there to eat on the shrubs, but just tunneling underneath them and causing those roots of the plants to dry out and certain portions of the plant dying. So they can cause dieback or death to plants. But they're notorious for raised tunnels, which irritate gardeners. And I think we can all agree on that part. A little bit about the mole itself. It's an insectivore. So right there at the beginning, we need to kind of clarify that a lot of times people blame moles for damage to their hosta plants or to their bulbs and those types of things, but they do not consume plant material. Maybe just a little bit of root material while they're digging and moving through the soil, but they're not searching for that. They're searching primarily for earthworms and for grubs, centipedes, other arthropods that would be living in the soil. Beetle grubs and those types of things, of course, are on the top of their list, but their number one food source is going to be earthworms. The eastern mole is adapted for life underground. They have a short body, maybe about 6 to 7 inches long. Their hind legs are shorter. Their front legs are these huge paddles with huge claws. And basically, when they move through the soil, they're almost like swimming through the soil, and they can move rapidly throughout the soil. Their hind legs are short, and that allows them, once they get to an area they can't go any further or they choose to turn, they can turn their whole body around inside of their little tunnel and reverse course and move a different direction. This is an interesting fact, and it works in our favor when we think about how do we control these moles, is that they're solitary. They don't like other moles being around them unless it's mating season. The rest of the time, on an acre lot, you're probably not going to find more than 3 moles. And I know some of you who have mole issues are probably saying, no way, there's got to be 100 out there, because look at my yard, it's a mess. 3 moles, most likely, are doing all of that types of damage that you're seeing in your lawn. So that helps. It's because they're in small numbers, because they're in territorial and they don't like of others around, then we can more easily manage them. And it's not all about trying to get rid of every possible number, because there's really a few numbers of those. They're most active early in the morning and in the evening. So we're talking around 5 to 9 in the morning, and in the evening, sometime after 6. They can feed year round, but as they follow the food source through the soil profile. So as it gets hotter, as it gets drier during the summer, they're going to go deeper, and you're most often not going to see as many tunnels, surface tunnels, showing up during the summertime. Now, Kentucky weather changes all the time. It's unpredictable. We've had many summers that are maybe a little bit hot and humid for short periods, but then cool off and we have rainfall, so they would move back up. So in Kentucky, I think you might see them around the surface any time of the year. But typically they follow where the food source is. The food source is earthworms. If the topsoil gets hot and dried out, those earthworms are going deeper, so are the moles. But they have a voracious appetite. They have to eat a lot of earthworms and invertebrates to maintain their energy level. And so that can also help us as we look at some of the different types of controls in just a second. So this is the number one culprit, the eastern mole. Let's look at some of the types of damage that you'll see. I forgot how to advance this. There we go. 2 types of mole tunnels. We have the surface run that you see over on this side here, and then you have the deeper tunnels, or the underground tunnels. The ones that we see and cause us the most issue. In fact, there's a whole bunch of them right out here at our extension office. I just tripped on one taking stuff to the dumpster earlier. They're typically temporary. They push up the soil and make that run that you're all familiar with. That's their feeding tunnels. That's what they're out and seeking out, these insects and earthworms. The underground tunnels, they're often pretty deep in the ground. And the only evidence that you know that they're there, and you may have seen these, are these big mole hills that will form up. So sometimes these tunnels are just deeper, and they're using it to move from one area to another. And then once they get to that area, all that dirt's got to go somewhere. So they make these little straight up shafts, and they push all the dirt up to the top. And I've seen mole mounds, this tall before. That's not the feeding mounds. That is your underground moving tunnels. It could also be where the den would be. So when the female is having the young, they'll exit out like a cavity underground. All of that dirt's got to go somewhere. So they push it up and make a huge mound, sometimes in your yard. If you're trying to use a trap and you're targeting that big mole mound, you will not be successful. You have to look for the feeding tubes. And this picture on the right-hand side of your screen, it shows where they used a sod cutter, and they just went back and peeled back an area of sod, so you could kind of see that there is absolutely no rhyme or reason to where their runs go, right? They are just looking for their food source. And so they may curve, they may make one tunnel and then abandon that and go a different direction. So that's a very, very important concept to keep in mind as we think about where are we going to put, if we're using a trap or a bait, where are we going to use that? So as we talk about mole management, there's a lot of options. And as we go through this presentation and different types of culprits here, these options are going to narrow down. You won't have as many. So we're going to briefly look at exclusion and predators, repellents, some chemical options, and then finish up with baits and trapping, which I can go ahead and tell you are going to be your number one options when it comes to controlling moles. Exclusion. So the idea behind exclusion is that this would work in a small area for a homeowner standpoint. Taking hardware cloth that sticks up 12 inches, I don't mean sticks up above the ground. I mean that you dig down 12 inches and it sticks up to the surface, and then it turns, makes a 90-degree angle and turns back. That will keep them from tunneling into an area. Now, where is that going to be practical? I don't know. It's going to take a lot of work to build something like that. Maybe if you've got an area that you're trying to protect, like the front landscape bed, this could be something that if you're having it installed, or if you're doing a lot of the work yourself before you start planting, you could dig out a deeper trench and put in something like this. If you have a raised bed, then you might be able to use something. It's not real common though for moles to come up in raised beds, but this could be something you could use on the bottom of the raised bed and maybe out a little bit to keep moles from getting up into that. Maybe if it was a more shallow raised bed, but if you're building it, 24 inches or so, it's probably not as likely. And as soon as I say that, I'm sure somebody's gonna put in the chat, oh no, they're in my raised bed. Another thing is that you could use something like a mole barrier. So this would be a commercial product that is dug around your property. You're going to make like a perimeter fence basically to keep moles from moving in. And that's something, the reason this could work in a situation is if your property backs up to a pasture field or something to that nature, where moles have free reign to feed and to forage, they may be moving back and forth between a pasture field and your lawn, right? So a mole barrier should theoretically keep them from gaining that access. So that's something to consider. That would be a pricey way to go, be a very laborious way to go to put something like that in. But if it's a major headache to you to have these moles keep invading your area, this could be an option for you. As we talk about trapping in a minute, or baits and those types of things, one thing that if I don't mention it then, I don't want to forget, is that you may be able very quickly to get rid of the 3 moles, maybe up to 4 or 5 moles in your yard. But if the surrounding areas are good habitat for earthworms and grubs and other invertebrates, the moles are still there. So it's only a matter of time before they work their way back into your yard. So you're going to have to weigh, how important is this? Or are you like the one person that put in the chat, I just deal with it. or I cannot tolerate it. My yard is perfect, and if a mole gets in here, I'm going to go insane. Then this might be an option for you to look at as one of these barriers. Okay, let's talk about repellents. We all want the easy fix, the easy thing to do. And so here is one option that has shown some promise. So there's a couple of products on the market. One is called Mole Med. The other is called Mole Chase, which is shown here. They have shown some minor effectiveness. It's basically a castor oil product. You go shake this thing around on the soil. They are effective, but they have to be continually applied every time it rains. It starts to break that product down, and it's less effective. So you could do that, but all you're really doing is delaying the problem. They move out of that section for a little bit, but then they're going to come right back. They're going to move out. They're going to come back out. Come back in. So if this is all you can do, then it's better than nothing, right? What about the mole bean plant? I don't know if you guys are familiar with mole bean plant. I grew up in the country, and I had my grandmother planted mole bean plants all around her garden to keep the moles out of there. I don't know if it was effective. She seemed to think that it was. According to the research, it's not proven to be effective. It's in fact, it's a poisonous to human. It's a weed. It's invasive, and it's not recommended. But maybe you swear by it, and maybe you've got some individual situation that just seems to be working. More power to you. Just be careful with it, and don't share it with your friends. Somebody mentioned a dog. Yes, this could work. Predators work. I have witnessed this. I have been at a client's house and watched their cat go out and put its ear to the ground and walk down a few feet in the tunnel and start to dig, but not all the way down so that the mole gets suspicious, and then be prepared. And as soon as the mole got close, it did that final dig and popped it right out of the ground. Can you train a cat to do that? Probably not. I don't think you can train a cat to do anything. Maybe litter box training, and that's about it. Dogs would also work. They could also be trained, I would think, to do that. But have you ever seen a dog dig up a mole run before? I think they would probably cause about as much damage as the mole. So options are there. Predators are a possibility. Probably only going to work if you already have one and you know that it's effective. I wouldn't go buy 50 cats to try to control your 4 moles. Chemicals. So a lot of people want to take this route, right? We know we have moles, so I must get rid of my grubs. I've got to spray these grubs and get rid of them. If you have a grub issue, spray for your grubs. If you're going out and you're peeling up portions of your sod because the grubs have eaten all the roots off, you've got a grub issue, you should probably treat for that. But if you just have the mole issue and the grubs are few and far between, controlling the grubs isn't going to stop your moles, because their primary diet, if you remember earlier, is on earthworms. And so are there products that will control earthworms? Yes, they're not sold for that because they are considered protected, and we don't like killing earthworms because they do a lot of beneficial things to our soil. So we're kind of stuck on this option. Treat grubs if you have a grub issue, but don't treat grubs to get rid of moles. It's not going to work. You may see a little bit of reduction, but they'll just switch to their food source and find something else to eat. If you're going to treat grubs, timing for that is mid-June to mid-July. What about fumigants? Let's put a gas bomb off in these tunnels and let's blow this thing to kingdom come and see what kind of success that we have. Your success is going to be pretty low. Somebody already mentioned that in the chat. It's difficult. You got tunnel. You saw the picture of the tunnels. Good luck trying to get that fumigant to disperse and not get absorbed or tied up in the soil and not sink into some little hole somewhere and get everywhere that it needs to get to be effective. Should you do this if you wanted to try it? No, you should not. You should have a commercial company come and try it if you feel like, oh, I think this will work in my situation. Give them the money, let them try it, and then come back to this presentation and find something else to use after it's not successful. I think that's probably the lesson to be learned there. Okay, now we're down to what is successful, and these are the tried and true, the proven options. Baits, taliprid, somebody already put that in the little Minty survey, and then traps. And you got some great options here. We have the harpoon trap, we have the choker loop trap, and the scissor jaw trap. Both work equally well. The baits, the taliprid bait is a little bit cleaner because you don't have to deal with the dead mole after you got him. But with the traps, you've got the evidence that you got the mole. And that's, I guess I kind of lean toward that because I could put these little worm things out in the soil in different places. And I don't really know if I got it. It's going to take a few weeks to see if there's any new mole runs. So I may still want to be putting out baits and waiting. But it's cleaner, it's easier to do. You don't have to deal with the trap. So there's definite reason to look at that, and it's been shown to be very effective. If you're not familiar with that, I have it's an empty box, but this is one example here. Does that show up? Yeah. So this is a Motomiko. I don't even know how you say that. This is one product that's on the market, and these are available in any garden centers. I think you can probably even get these at Walmart. And then this is a harpoon trap. If you're not familiar with these traps, you can get these at, I know at the same places. You can probably get these at like Tractor Supply and other things. So this one has not been used on a mole. It's rusty, but it's not been used. They have a trigger pan here, and then these are the harpoons that's going to eliminate your mole issue. The other types, I don't see them as often, but you may have access to those, the scissor type and the choker lube. This is the one that you're going to find the most readily available. It takes a little bit of muscle, and I think that's another issue to look at. The earthworm, the gummy worm option, to be able to get this guy set. Maybe I shouldn't set this while I'm on the camera. Anyways, it takes a little bit of muscle to pull this back. But I will say neither of those are going to be effective if we don't use them correctly. And so this is how you use it correctly. And this is where most people make the mistake. Think back to that picture where we had the sod pulled back, and we've got all of these tunnels and runs throughout the yard. This is kind of a little diagram of that. You see the driveway is listed there. We've got mouse. Okay, there we go. We've got these big mounds. So this is a deep run. Don't trap in the deep run. That's not going to prove it's not going to have any proven results for doing that, right? What you're looking for, not the little squiggly lines that go out and then just stop and different and separated and those types of things. You're looking for the long straight runs. And a lot of times these will be along the edge of your property or along the edge of a house or maybe along the edge of a driveway. Here it shows one kind of coming along the driveway and across. These are the locations, these long straight tunnels, where you're most likely going to set your traps. But how do you know where the mole is working that day? Because these moles move everywhere. They're moving one side of your yard to another, or maybe to another neighbor's yard. So the first step, and most people miss this step, is to go out the night before. You're going to do your trapping or putting out the baits, and you're going to stomp down sections of tunnels, and then you're going to put something in the ground, whether it's a flag or a stick, whatever you've got on hand, just to remember, oh yeah, I punched it down in these areas. And then the next morning, remember, these guys like to get up early and get busy. So get up early with them and see where they have pushed up the soil. If they've pushed up the soil in one of the locations that you stomped it down, that's your target. You need to set your trap, or you need to put that little worm, the little bait down into that hole immediately, because they may not be there in a few more hours. You need to get it set right then. And how do we do that? So with the little worm, these are great because you just put on a rubber glove, you grab the worm out of the package, out of the box, and then you take something like take that stick and poke a hole all the way down through to the tunnel, and then just drop it, just like the picture shows. You just drop it down inside and then put a little soil over the top. You're done. Walk away. Hopefully you'll catch him. Hopefully. And I think that they are effective, but again, it's the same issue I just mentioned, is that you don't know that you got him. If you're using the trap, you're going to excavate first. You've got to dig out. If you just take that trap and stick it right on top of the mole run, who knows where the tunnel is? The tunnel could be down here, and there's no way these tines are going to reach that, right? So you've got to dig out and find out, oh, the tunnel's down here. So that the tunnel lines up with the bottom of this trip pan. Here's the trip pan. And that trip pan then is going to be set right on the top of the hole. So you take out the soil, you tamp it down, again, back to wherever the height is, and then you put your trap in, pull the tines up a couple of times to make sure that they have room to be able to, like, pre-drilling is like making a holes through the dirt so they don't get stuck on a rock or whatever, and then walk away from that and let it sit. If you've got pets or you're worried about kids or other things in the area, you might put like a bucket over it or something to leave it. Step back. You already know they're working in that tunnel. I'd say within an hour and a half, you'll have your first mole. and then you just do it again because they're going to be working in that zone. So you do it again, and within a day, you've got all 3 of your moles, and you can go home and be done. Sounds pretty simple, but I really think that it is. I think it can be that simple. We just don't do some of the steps right. So I'm going to shift now to another of the types of diggers that we see in our yard. And for this one, I called him the Ghost. I don't know if you've caught on yet, but I'm kind of making these like a crime scene investigation here. But this is the Ghost, is his nickname, aka the Vole. And the reason that I thought Ghost was appropriate for him is that most of the time moles get the blame, but the vole is doing the damage. And a lot of people that will call in, I'll mention a vole, and they'll not even know what a vole, what is a vole. So a vole is a rodent. They eat grasses, forbs, seeds, tubers, bulbs. These are the guys that are eating that $50 hosta that you splurged on. They're taking all the root system off, and they're chewing into that, is it a bulb? Rhizome. They're chewing into the part of the plant. These are the guys that are eating the bark off of your brand new planted fruit tree down at the base. Okay, these are the problem. But the mole gets the blame because he makes the biggest mess. They are active day and night, and they're active year round. They breed year round. We're talking 5 or 6 generations in a year. The only saving grace here is that they don't last long. Their lifespan of a vole is basically about 18 months at the most. 80% of their offspring die within the first month. So they don't have a great track record, and that's good for us. They have kind of a cyclic outbreak, I would say. So every 4 years, on average, they tend to reach a level of density that it's a severe problem in your garden or in your flower beds. And then once it gets to that point, it's like a breaking point. There's too many, there's not enough food source, or diseases come in, and it crashes and it goes back down. And so those first year, the second year, when it restarts, you don't see very many voles. And then it will keep building, and the population will increase. And then you'll get up to that point again where we get more and more calls about, wow, I've got voles everywhere. Yeah, well, it must be close to the 4th or 5th year. We do have 3 species in Kentucky: the meadow vole, the prairie vole, the pine vole. There's a little bit of difference in how they behave, but on average, it's kind of the same thing. So I've said that they have outstanding warrants for gnawing off plants, girdling trees and shrubs. They also build extensive surface runways without a permit. The difference here between the mole, of course, is that subsurface runways, and these are on the surface. And I've got a picture to show you. So this is what vole tunnels can look like. I've never seen it this bad in Kentucky. The reason this is so bad, and why it probably isn't going to happen in Kentucky, I don't know if it will ever happen again, is that this is further north, and this is after a lot of snowfall that stayed on the ground for months. I don't think we have that, or we'll probably get that anymore in the future in Kentucky. So you got maybe 6 to 12 inches of snow in an area in your lawn, and it just stays there. They're still running. They're moving up and down, and they're eating up grass, and they're eating up the roots of everything that they can. And when the snow melts, this is what's left behind. We don't have that, and thank goodness. But we do have a lot of what you see here in the bottom right corner, and that is the bark being chewed off of trees. So there are some things that we can do to reduce these voles and to kind of keep this type of damage from happening. So let's look at some of the vole management options. You see our bubbles have decreased a little bit. We can look at habitat modification. We can look at exclusion, toxicants, and then trapping. So let's hit those. Exclusion. Hardware cloth, again, is our friend. I think he comes up one more time in this presentation. So invest in hardware cloth. I have seen people take bulbs and build like a hardware cloth cage. I think they're also commercially available, and plant these bulbs, tulip bulbs and other things in the ground within that, so that this little critter doesn't come and chew them up. Certainly, whether it's for a rabbit or for a vole, we're putting some sort of a cylinder of hardware cloth around the trunks of our trees, making sure that the mesh is small enough so that the vole can't get through it. There's been situations where the vole is large enough, they can get inside, and then they can stay close to the trunk of the tree and be protected all winter. So you provided them a new habitat. So it needs to be close enough to the trunk of the tree, and then you have to pay attention to it so that it doesn't grow into the tree and make it larger as necessary. It's usually just, well, I won't say it's just, but it's primarily a bigger issue when the tree is young. So these types of things, can be beneficial. Also thinking about that cylinder of hardware cloth, it doesn't just sit on top of the ground. Remember, they're digging right at the surface. They can dig under it. So you need to dig around the tree and bury it a few inches in the ground so that they can't get under that, or that they most likely wouldn't. Looking at habitat modification. So in a flower bed, when you see voles, that's typically there's some mulch, and typically you start digging, or maybe you're getting ready to put down new mulch, and you dig back and you see a little depressed tunnel that runs throughout, and maybe there's a dead plant or something else. So they like something that covers them. And mulch sometimes, even though we know the benefits of using mulch in a flower bed, it's also a habitat for them. It gives them a cover. They can just tunnel right there at the surface, and they can make a little hole and go a little bit deeper and hide. The same thing can happen in a yard, or maybe in a natural area where you have taller grasses or wildflowers and those types of things. We're not saying mow it all down, but we are saying if you're having that issue in your yard, maybe you need to mow a little bit closer. A lot of these things I always laugh, because we just had turf a little while ago. We talked about mowing your grass high for the health of the turf. And now I'm saying mow it a little bit closer for the health of your turf. It all depends on the problem, right? It's all relative. Eliminate weeds, maybe including ground covers. So if you've got a bed that's got a bunch of ivy in it or something else that is providing a habitat for these voles, it may be necessary to get good control to remove that. Or you can try some of the other options first and see if that helps. But the easiest habitat modification we can address is in this picture here. Isn't that great? This is volcano mulching. And if you've been listening to these horticulture webinar Wednesdays at some point in the past, I know you've had to heard a speaker talk about, don't do this. Don't put mulch. Don't take your whole bag of mulch that you just picked up and dump it on one tree and then mound it up into this huge volcano. There's a lot of disadvantages to the tree for doing that, but for voles, you've provided a great home. They can get inside that little mulch during the wintertime, and as they get hungry, just keep nibbling on the bark of your newly planted hawthorn or whatever your tree might be, and just eventually girdle it. Take it out. It'll be a dead tree the next hot spell that comes along. So we can avoid that by spreading that mulch out 2 to 3 inches deep, and also leaving a gap. So, a gap around the trunk of the tree, it's relative, I guess, but at least 3 inches, but maybe even bigger. If you know you have vole pressure in that area. The reason for the gap is you're not providing them the habitat, but also you're exposing them. So if a hawk or something is nearby, there's a lot of things that eat these voles. So we want to get them out. So if they think they're going to eat on that tree, they're going to have to cross an open area to be able to do that. And that can be a great deterrent. Toxins. So I took this picture at the UK orchard on campus, and some of our growers around here use these too. So toxins are an option, but there is a lot of off-target species damage that can be happening. And we're talking about your family dog, or I don't know how many cases there have been of kids, but picking up these types of toxins. But there's a severe risk here, right? And not just domesticated animals, but also wild animals too, that you're not trying to control those. So we have to be really careful about that. Zinc phosphide is the most commonly used product out there, but it is a restricted use pesticide if you're treating for voles. What's odd about that is that it's also sold as mole bait or gopher bait, but mole bait in our state. Same product, it's in mole bait, it's not labeled for voles. And as we've already talked about with moles, they don't eat that, they eat insects. So go figure on that one. I guess you could purchase mole bait and treat your vole problem by putting that mole bait in a mole tunnel. That might work. But technically speaking, there's not a zinc phosphide that you can buy without some sort of restricted use license to be able to purchase that. But there are anticoagulant baits that you can buy. I did a quick search on Amazon earlier, and they come in these little blocks. You've probably seen them. They got like a peanut butter base, and then they have that bait in it. And if you're going to use those, that's where these little PVC pipes come in. So you have a little T-post part at the end, and then you have the pipe, and the top picture, the tape has come off, but in the bottom one, you can see the tape, or you can just buy an end cap, and I don't know why that's not on there. And then you just take your bait and you turn it and you drop it down into the long part of the pipe, and let it sit there. Lay it down out in your orchard. It's much less likely that any sort of wild animal is going to get access to it, except for those voles. And I think that they've found that to be pretty effective in that situation. Now, is it pretty? No. Do you want it right in your front landscape bed? Probably not. So let's look at traps. So this can also work. Remember, they look a lot like a field mouse, just a little bit bigger, but they have some of the same habits. So even the little grocery store mouse trap that you pick up can be worked. You could bait this with peanut butter, probably not cheese. Anyway, something like peanut butter or apple or something of that nature, and then put something over the top of it. And you can have pretty good success in catching voles. And if it's in a small area and very minimum damage so far, this is probably where I would start. One more note on using those baits. So another option, and I tell people who call in this sometimes, is that if you have a bed and you can visibly see all these different runs going through a landscape bed. So one thing you could do is encourage more voles to come to that spot. And bear with me, but encourage more to come there by taking some rocks or small piece of brick or something, and then a piece of plywood and setting it on top. You've provided a nice cover. So we're going to use habitat modification to their advantage, but it's going to turn out to be to our advantage. So we've created a cover for them. They already work the area. Now they're going to come underneath that board. They're going to have a party. They're going to dig out all this area. There's going to be all of them's going to come there. It's where they come to hang out. And once you keep checking it, keep lifting up that board, and once you see, wow, they're really working this area, then take your bait, stick it right inside of that area, and put the piece of wood back down and walk away. Right, and they need 4 to 5 days to feed on that bait for it to do its job. It's protected that way from off-target species. And I think that has been proven to be pretty effective for a lot of people. All right, so we've covered the mole, we covered the vole. Now we're going to go a little bit off target, but it's one that I get a lot of calls on. So the next one is the mussel, aka the striped skunk, or I don't know how many of you grew up with this word, but polecat. This is another digger that we sometimes find in lawns. And as we talk about this, just be mindful. It is dangerous. It is armed and dangerous, so you need to be careful. The issue with the skunk, we'll get to in just a second, and what I get calls about typically, the type of digging that they do. But I want to kind of put that in this presentation because it is pretty common, at least in our county. These are omnivores, so they're eating insects, they're eating dog food, they're eating apples or fruit or whatever they find that they'll eat on, right? They're a member of the weasel family. They do not hibernate in winter, but they do go inactive. They do kind of, let's just say, take a nap, but not for all of winter, because if it warms back up, they're going to be back out and they're going to be active. They are nocturnal, so they do all of their hunting mostly at nighttime, and they are very susceptible to rabies. So if you happen to see a skunk out in the middle of the day foraging or walking around erratically, be very mindful that they could be carrying rabies. The issue that we have with them is that they do dig in lines. They do get underneath the house foundation, so they might dig out around the foundation and work their way in, depending on what type of foundation you have. A lot of times people just leave openings for them to come in there too. So unlawful entry is one of their crimes. However, they've also been known to kill poultry if you have a backyard poultry flock, or if you're a beekeeper. I don't understand this, and I've not talked to a beekeeper to confirm this, but apparently they eat the bees. I don't know how they can do that without getting severely injured, but apparently they do. This is where I get the call. I get somebody to say, our yard was fine. We don't have any moles. There's these little holes in our yard. They don't go anywhere. They're just, like stick my finger down in it and it stops. And the dirt's been thrown back. What caused this? And you got to be mindful that there's lots of things that could dig holes that we're not going to include. I mean, dogs could just be out in the neighborhood and dig a hole. But a lot of times skunks will do this type of work. So they use their little front claws, they dig out a shallow hole, and then they stick their nose down in it. And their nose is kind of conical shape, and the holes are kind of conical shape. And they just dig in, they're looking for grubs. So I don't know if they smell or they hear or they feel like something is in this area. They'll dig back a little bit and stick their nose in and try to get to that grub. If you see that, it's a good chance it's probably a skunk that's causing that issue. Is it a huge issue? Probably not. I mean, I've seen yards that have maybe as many as 10 to 12 of these types of holes in it. I took this one in my neighborhood, but I didn't have him in my yard. I knew he was in the area though, because you could smell him. We're running out of options here. We're down to habitat modification, and for trapping and shooting, I listed it because it's in our UK pub. If you're in town, most likely that's not going to be an option for you. We're not going to cover that one, but let's look at these other two. So this is a lot of work, habitat modification, but the other call, when someone knows they have a skunk issue, it's usually because they've taken up residence underneath their house, right? They've left the crawl space door open. The seal around one of those vents was all busted and they just climbed in. Or maybe it was an outbuilding like the example here, and it was just open space anyway. So they just went under. So what can you do in that situation? Well, if it doesn't have a concrete block foundation, this is an option. It's going to take a lot of work to get there, but this is an option that may be necessary if you want to seal off that access area to skunks denning up underneath houses, because even when they're not spraying, they produce a musk and it's going to smell and it's going to come up into a house and be on your property. So we probably are going to do what we can to reduce that issue. So you can see, just like in the other examples, we've got hardware cloth up to the building, and then it goes down and underground out a little piece so they can't dig underneath it and come up. But what if you already have a concrete foundation, but you left the access door off and skunks have gone in, and now you've got a nest of skunks living underneath there? What do you do to get them out without getting sprayed? So one thing you can do is, just the way that this is connected to the bottom board of this building, is to cut a piece. It doesn't go down, it doesn't make this curve, but it's on the outside, so that when a skunk is inside of underneath your house, when it's trying to come out to forage at nighttime, it can push it up and climb out, but it can't come back. So there might be like a board or a block, something at the bottom, so that when they go to push on the mesh to go back in underneath your house, they can't gain access. And then give them some time. Make sure that there's more than one. Make sure they've all had time to come out of the house. And then you can go about sealing it up, getting a new door installed, whatever needs to be done to make sure that they can't gain access again. I think that this will work pretty good. Sometimes we think there might be an animal underneath the house, whether it's a skunk or something else, and we're not sure. If you just want to be absolutely certain what it is, I've even seen people take like a bag of flour and just sprinkle it out on the ground outside of that access point, and make sure all the other access, if there's others, are all sealed. So there's only one way in and one way out for that animal. And then after the nighttime happens, go back in the morning and see if tracks have come out from underneath that house, and see if they've gone back in, or if you've come out and didn't go back. Then you might just be able to go on and seal it up at that point. Just good maintenance around your house can help a lot. Keeping areas where skunks could find shelter or food, keeping those reduced will be helpful. If you have animals that eat outside, making sure that you don't leave a lot of food or something that they might be attracted to, that can also be helpful. But if you have one and you're going to have to get him off your property, trapping is the way to go. And I know what you're thinking. No way I'm putting a skunk in there. So these are have-a-heart traps. We're not killing the skunk. We're just going to trap him and try to relocate him. So there's a lot of opinions about that. Obviously, if you're trapping one that has rabies, like we mentioned earlier, relocating him is not an option. You're going to need somebody to help euthanize that, because you're going to be creating an issue somewhere else. You may be creating an issue just by catching a skunk on your property and moving it to some other location too. So that's something to kind of consider. But can you move it with permission to another landowner's farm? Absolutely, you can do that. If you're going to buy a live trap, they need to be at least 10 inches by 10 inches by 30 inches long. Some of them come with like a canvas over it, but even if they don't, just get a heavy canvas and put that over the top of the trap. And while I can't speak from personal experience, I am told, so you can be my guinea pig, if you catch one, if you have that covered over with a canvas, they won't spray. When it's dark, they calm down, they won't spray, and you'll be safe to pick that thing up, put it in the back of a truck, probably not in the front seat with you, and drive it out to a location, and then let that animal go. Bait for that, canned or fresh fish, seems to work the best. If you know that they're denning like under a house or something, then locating it in that site is going to be the most likely success in catching that animal. All right, I'm gonna blow your mind with this next one, I think, unless you've experienced it. Number 4, the insiders are the earthworms. So some of you are probably already thinking I'm turning this off. He doesn't know anything because he's saying earthworms are pests. Well, obviously we know they're not pests. They're decomposers. They improve our soil composition. They're considered beneficial. But when populations get really, really high, you can get this. And I had 2 cases of this last year here in Christian County, where there were so many earthworms. And I didn't try to break down the species of earthworms. I really can't tell you how many there are, but I know we have one that is this big, no fooling, that is really long, some sort of huge night crawler. And when they tunnel into the soil, and there's a lot of them, they come to the surface and they bring all that waste with them, and you can have piles of this stuff in an area. And it can ruin the look of a lawn. It can be a dangerous situation. It can be slick and muddy. It's castings. It's good fertilizer, but they're destroying a lawn in that situation. And I've seen it on golf courses, and I've seen it in lawns. So I wanted to include that because if you go out and you're looking at tunnels and holes and you find this one, and you might think, oh, it must be a mole, because we blame the mole for everything. No, it could be an earthworm that's causing that too. And that's typically how it goes. I do not have a slide on management of earthworms because there's not any products for management of earthworms. Are there things you could do to your yard to reduce the earthworm population? Yes, but you'll have to go research that yourself. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I would not recommend it. It's temporary. You can break this stuff back out and spread it over. It makes more work for you. You may have to reseed an area depending on how bad it is. But would I go and put chemicals down to try to kill earthworms? I would not recommend that. And then the last one, and if you're tuning in from Northern Kentucky, this is probably not in your area, but we're getting these calls more and more every day. And that's the new guy, the 9-banded armadillo. So if you've seen that in the state, in a minute when we go to questions, I'd like to hear about that. I'm sure if you're in Western Kentucky, you've seen this, and I had a phone call this morning if somebody's seen one and wanted to know if they're supposed to report this to the state. Not that I'm aware of. I don't think you have to. These are mostly insectivores, eating insects. They're mostly active at nighttime. They could be out during the day some, probably in that crepuscular time, right before early afternoon or late in the morning. I'm not saying that right. Early morning or late in the afternoon. They have very poor eyesight, and so when they're focused on finding an insect in the ground, they're just focused. You can walk right up to this guy, and once he realizes you're there, he'll jump. He'll jump out of his skin, basically. He'll jump, and that's typically how they get injured out on the road, get killed on the road, is that they're just tracking, and they've wandered out into the middle of the road, and that's the end of it for them. So they don't focus very well. They cannot tolerate freezing temperatures, and that's why I'm saying if you're in Northern Kentucky, you may not see this guy, but who knows with temperatures in Kentucky, how far that they can make it. What they do is they create these burrows, typically in wooded areas, not right in your front yard, and then they go deep in these grounds, but they're not asleep. They're just hanging out and they're waiting. They don't build up and store up body fat like skunks do so that they can live off of that. They're just waiting for the opportunity to go back out. So if we have a really long, cold winter, they most likely would not make it, not because of not being able to get to a warm spot, but because they won't be able to go eat. I thought it was also interesting that they're related to the anteater and a sloth. But they can cause some damage, and further in states further south of us, they can be pretty significant in the type of damage that they do, digging up huge areas of the soil, up to 3 inches deep, 3 to 5 inches wide. I've got a couple of pictures here I can show you of them invading a lawn and the type of digging that they do. We don't want these, but we may not have an option. I researched a little bit. I've always heard that they carry leprosy. The information that I found from university sources online said that that's largely blown out of proportion. The only time that's ever happened, not that they can't carry it, was when apparently they're good eating, but somebody ate one that was not well cooked and that person got leprosy. Other than that, it's very unlikely that that they're going to bring leprosy to our area. So that's about it. If you happen to see one of these suspects in your yard, here are some of the authorities you can reach out to. The Fish and Wildlife Resources Department of Kentucky. There are some resources online also where you can get more information. Dr. Matt Springer, which a lot of this presentation came from him. He's our wildlife management specialist, and all of his links are on that. And of course, your county extension office, and let them know what you see.